Neuropathy is not just a nerve problem, and that misunderstanding is why so many treatments fail. If you have been told you have neuropathy, you are probably told it is nerve damage. That explanation is not completely wrong, it just stops too early. Neuropathy becomes confusing when it is explained too narrowly. Today is not about treatment and it's not about promise. Today is about the model that we use to understand what exactly is happening. Because when the model is wrong, even reasonable care will fail. Let me start with a simple truth. Most people are taught to think of neuropathy like it's an injury. Something got damaged, now you fix it, or it heals. And when that does not happen, people begin to panic. They blame themselves or they assume that the damage must be permanent. But neuropathy, it doesn't behave like a simple injury. It behaves like a systems problem that shows up in the nerves. Once you understand that, a lot of what felt confusing starts to make sense. So here is the core idea. Neuropathy is rarely just a nerve problem. It is usually a problem of the environment that the nerves live in. When people hear that, they usually ask, well, what do you mean by environment? I'm not talking about your home. I'm talking about the biological environment around the nerve. Nerves are living tissue. They need oxygen, they need nutrient delivery, they need stable energy production. They need chemical stability so the signal is not distorted. A nerve is not a wire. It is a living tissue, and living tissue behaves based on condition. When the conditions around the nerve become unstable over time, the nerve does not always die immediately. What often happens first is much more subtle. The nerves become unreliable. And that unreliability, it's going to show up in burning, tingling, numbness, electrical sensations, pins and needle, and a growing mistrust of your own balance. This is where people get trapped. They assume that the symptoms are a direct measure of the damage. But in neuropathy, symptoms are often a measure of behavior. Symptoms are often a measure of signal quality, not tissue destruction. That's why symptoms can fluctuate even when damage does not. So if you heard someone say that they had a bad day, that doesn't automatically mean you lost more nerve. If you had a good day, that doesn't automatically mean that the nerve is healed. Neuropathy is not always linear at the level of sensation. Sensation is the output. The output changes based on sleep, stress, blood sugar, inflammation, activity, footwear, temperature, hydration, and so many other variables. That's why people often say, it was terrible last night, but calmer this morning. My tests are normal, but I feel like I'm still walking on rocks. It's worse when I'm tired, or it's worse when I'm stressed, or it's worse at night. Sometimes it burns, sometimes it's numb. Now, those symptoms, they're not imagined, and it's not weakness. That is exactly what an unstable nervous system does to an unstable environment. Now, this matters for one reason. Most neuropathy care starts with one goal: to make you feel better. Calm the nerve, block the signal, and reduce the pain. And of course, relief matters because pain is going to affect your sleep, sleep affects the healing, healing affects morale, fear affects the nervous system itself. So symptom relief, it is not bad care, but symptom relief and system change are not the same thing. This is where disappointment happens. People get relief, then it fades. Or they get partial relief, but the condition, it keeps trending in the wrong direction. They assume that the treatment stopped working. Some treatments did exactly what they were designed to do. It quieted the signal. But the environment driving the signal, it never changed. That's why relief doesn't always hold. This is the difference between quieting a nerve and changing the direction of the system that dictates how the nerve behaves. So let's go a little bit deeper. When I say neuropathy is not just a nerve problem, I'm not saying that the nerves don't matter. I'm saying that the nerve is a downstream problem. But downstream from what? Over time, nerve behavior is shaped by 4 major pillars. 1, circulation. 2, metabolic stability. 3, inflammatory load. And 4, mechanical stress and sensory input. If those pillars are stable, the nerves have a fighting chance to actually adapt. If they are unstable, nerves are going to struggle, even with reasonable symptom management. So let's walk through all 4 pillars. The first one is circulation and microdelivery. Most people, they think of circulation means blocked arteries. But nerves, especially in the feet, rely on what we call microdelivery, small vessel exchange, tissue level oxygen and nutrient flow. You can have open arteries and still have poor microdelivery. That can look like cold feet, slow healing, skin and color changes, lingering swelling, and progressive nerve symptoms. Not because a major artery is blocked, but because tissue level delivery is compromised. Nerves absolutely hate that. When delivery is unreliable, signaling becomes noisy, repair becomes inefficient, and the thresholds begin to change. This is why normal imaging can be misleading. Someone can say the X-ray looks normal, the MRI was normal, the NCV EMG were normal, and nerve function can still be failing. That is not failure of imaging, it's a mismatch between the question being asked and the level of physiology that is involved. Next, we have metabolic stability and energy. Nerves are metabolically demanding. They need steady energy. Blood sugar swings, insulin resistance, poor sleep, chronic stress, they all create what we call chemical noise. So people focus on A1C like it tells the whole story, but A1C is just an average. Neuropathy is driven by variability, not just the average. Even when numbers look better, instability keeps the nerves irritable. Noise makes symptoms very unpredictable, and really, predictability is what people actually want. Most neuropathy patients are not just looking for less pain. They're looking for stability. They want to trust what their feet will allow them to do tomorrow. That stability is often metabolic just as much as it is neurological. Next, we have inflammatory load. Inflammation is a stress signal. Chronic stress, metabolic strain, poor sleep, inactivity, or long-term illnesses, they're going to increase the inflammatory load. You may not feel it directly, but the nerves do. Inflammation increases irritability, sensitivity, burning, and shocking sensations. So when someone says, I feel worse when I'm stressed, or I feel worse when I have bad sleep, that's not psychological. That's actually physiology. Mechanical stress and sensory input is another one that's ignored way too often. Gait changes, balance changes, change in your footwear, surface exposure changes. Avoiding pain changes movement patterns. Those patterns can amplify the symptoms. Unreliable sensory input changes how the brain interprets the signals, and that's going to create a loop. Less trust leads to less movement. Less movement worsens delivery. Worse delivery worsens signal. Worse signaling increases fear. So if you don't recognize the loop, you treat the output while the loop continues in the background. So here is the big takeaway. If you only target nerve signal, you can help symptoms. If the environment remains unstable, the nerve remains unreliable. That's why neuropathy care often works and then it stops. It did one job. It calmed the signal. It did not change the upstream conditions. That's why people plateau. Now, an important clarification that I want to make. Nerve damage does not automatically mean everything is hopeless. Some nerves are damaged. Some are stressed. Some are noisy but intact. Some are alive but undernourished. Those distinctions matter. They determine a few things. They determine what change is actually possible, how long the change is going to take, and what success actually looks like, and also what should never be promised. This is why ethical care always will avoid guarantees. Neuropathy is multi-factor, cumulative, and time-dependent. You cannot guarantee outcomes in a system like that. What you can do is use a model that makes sense, guide consistent input, and track objective trends over time. Now the emotional side. Many neuropathy patients, they all try so hard. They've done medication, supplements, creams, injections, therapies, and sometimes even surgery. They feel hope, and that's why they keep trying to look for resolution. But they also feel humiliation because nothing works. The worst thing you can do is feel bad or feel like it's your fault. So here is the correct reframe. Persistent symptoms do not mean you failed. They often mean the environment around the nerve did not stabilize enough to change direction. So there's no blame that should be assigned. That's just physics. Biology obeys conditions. Now, the most important statement. The question is not, how do I fix my nerves? The better question is, what conditions do my nerves need to function reliably? That question changes everything. People stop chasing daily symptoms. They stop making fear-based decisions. They stop changing everything every week. They start building stability. And stability changes outcomes more than intensity, especially when it comes to nerves. Because nerves adapt to patterns, not burst, we have to let that sink in. So let's ground this practically. If you're dealing with neuropathy and deciding what direction makes sense, you need three things. You need clarity on what is driving your peripheral neuropathy, realistic expectations about time and trajectory, and a structure that includes more than one pillar. That is how you avoid the endless loop of random solutions. The whole neuropathy is just a nerve problem story fails people. It is too small for the problem. So I want to end with this. You do not need perfect days to be improving. Progress often looks like fewer bad days, shorter flare-ups, more predictable mornings, better balance, and confidence, objective trends that stabilize over time. That is the real progress when it comes to neuropathy. It is quiet, it is cumulative, and it is meaningful.